I can't tell you the number of men I have sat with in my office or online spaces that are so grieved at what they have done to others, at what they have done to themselves, and who daily try to be aware and insightful and making different choices.
Mhm.
And they do an excellent job, but it is lifelong. It's so common to say like, oh, just leave that all behind. I just don't think that way. I've left religion. Maybe I'm an atheist or whatever. But when you are in it, like it is in your body, it is ingrained into your neural pathways and your entire body is impacted. It's not just leaving it behind. It's recognizing how it was embodied in you and taking the painful, uncomfortable steps every day of the little tiny choices that we make that are different.
Hi, this is Frank Schaeffer, and you are watching and or listening to my podcast, In Conversation with Frank Schaeffer. And this goes to all the places podcasts go, as well as a live event on Facebook to begin with, and to YouTube, etc. And my guest today is Dr. Laura Anderson, whose book I have just read and marked up, and it's official because I spilled coffee on it, so it's real. I'll show you the stain. You can't fake that. When I read on Kindle or a file, then there's no way to prove I've actually done it, but I can show you this book and you'll know that I'm not lying.
Oh, I love it.
Dr. Laura Anderson is the founder and director of the Center for Trauma Resolution and Recovery, and she's the author of, and here's the book and the coffee stains, I'll show you in a minute, When Religion Hurts You. And the subtitle is Healing from Religious Trauma and the Impact of High Controlled Religion. And Laura, the first thing I want to do is make sure I'm addressing you correctly. May I call you Laura instead of Dr. Anderson?
Yes, please do. Yes. Yeah. I feel like I've known you for forever. So call me Laura.
Good. Well, hey, Laura, this is good.
Yeah.
There's all sorts of things. I'm going to first start in a weird thing. And that is, in reading the beginning of the book, you tell your story in terms of some of the trauma you experienced. I got to the end of the book saying, yeah, but what now? How is Laura now? I wanted you, if I had been your editor, I would have said, you can't do that. You can't tell us about the problem at the beginning and then finish with some nice advice to people who have suffered similarly to you. I wanted a personal note when this goes, after Oprah picks it up and you do another edition. You're going to write a personal end note that's going to match the beginning that I'm going to read in a minute to people. And you're going to say, and here's where, as I finish this book, here's where I am today. So I'm going to do that.
Yeah.
That's a weird place to start. And then we'll get into what the book's about. So where are you at?
Yeah. Well, I am, as the book suggests, healing as a nonlinear process. I am always in that process, but I feel like I'm at a really good place. I've done a lot of work. There's still areas in my life where I have to make those accommodations on a daily basis, but living in the South, there are plenty of triggers every single day, just, walking around. So that's where I see the moments of healing, that I can go into certain places, that I can be in conversations with my clients who are going through this and stay stable and grounded. And I feel really good about that. And it's fun because I look at where I was at 10 years ago and who I am today, and the capacity I can have for compassion and empathy, patience with myself and others. And I'm a different person. I love that. That is like the living healing.
Yeah, you've moved on from your background. So one thing I'd like to start with, and I think you mentioned this in the acknowledgements or something, you're going through people who were kind to you, and also just that you sort of, you don't say, well, who first kind of forgave me for walking away, but kind of intimate that you've kept relationships going. So first of all, your parents, are they alive? What do they think of you now? Are they still part of the program? Are you guys on speaking terms? Siblings, friends, family, your old youth pastor who you worked for a while, who's talking to you, who doesn't, what are your relationships from the part you moved on from?
Yeah, I am still in contact with my family. I have siblings and sister-in-laws and nieces and nephews and parents. I am the only one in the family who has walked away like this. In fact, I have two other siblings who are pastors. So that's always really fun. And I've worked really hard to maintain relationships with them because, of course, I know that religion can be such an identity factor. And so when somebody rejects that, it can feel like they're rejecting you. So I've made a concerted effort with my family in particular to make sure that they know I love them regardless of similarities or differences. And I think it's paying off. I have some of my siblings I'm closer to than others, and it's because of the hard work of relationship we put in. I don't have a lot of contact with people outside of my family. From my old life. There's a handful of them. Because I have a bit of a platform on Instagram in particular, people find me from my old life. So I have had the opportunity to talk to apologize, to make amends with several of my old students who I was their leader in youth group. I mentored them in purity culture and things like that. And I know there's more out there, but whoever slides into my DMs, I am always happy to have those conversations with. I don't know that I will ever speak to, like, for instance, the youth pastor I talk about in that book. I have done a lot of my own healing work. I had an experience with him a handful of years ago where just almost like subconsciously, all my healing was like right there. And I responded in a very different way to kind of this bid for connection that he made. And because it was so different, he didn't know how to handle it. And I remember kind of having an out of body experience going, he doesn't have control over me anymore. This is really beautiful. And I feel like I'm done there. I feel like I don't need to talk to him. I don't need to see him again. And I'm okay with that. I don't want to anymore.
Okay, so now I'm gonna look, I've started this totally backwards, and like it's as if people are jumping into the middle of the second half of an interview where we're talking about stuff. Okay, I'm gonna do it right now. Okay, I have just finished reading When Religion Hurts You. And I want to just mention that because Laura covers so much territory that I have either experienced, lived myself, known people well who have lived, journeyed through. I interview all sorts of authors, and often they're writing about something that I know a little bit about in terms of general knowledge, but it isn't my territory. This book is on my turf. Okay. And so as someone who gets what you're saying, I first just want to recommend this book and say, When Religion Hurts You is not only an important book, but to the extent that I know Laura's views in this book, she's telling the truth. This is how it is. This is how it unrolls. My experience of religion hurting and trauma is mirrored exactly in this book. So if you come from a religious background, have journeyed beyond it, but taken some baggage with you, if you want something that is therapeutic in a true sense, but not psychobabble and not me, look inward, contemplate myself and so forth, but actually want to make some changes in your life, read this book. It's an important book. So that's where I should start, by just saying you really hit one out of the park. This is great. I'm going to jump in and read some things. This is from page 208. It's toward the end of the book, and then I'm going to go back and do this in the order. But it took 6 years of visiting various healers and helpers before a therapist helped me recognize that my symptoms matched the diagnosis of CPTSD. Just jump in and tell us what that means.
Complex post-traumatic stress disorder, or we might also call it complex trauma.
Yeah, okay. And dissociative identity order, not otherwise specified. The dissociation disorder is common among survivors of complex trauma. And of course, in the book, you explain how religious trauma often is, or mostly is, in fact, complex trauma, which is a term. That's about as technical as the book gets. Anybody can understand it. I was able to, and she has a very handy little list at the beginning of some of these acronyms. Now I want to jump back to the beginning and talk about how this book goes. In the introduction, you say, redefining healing as an ongoing process became like a pair of glasses that helped me see more clearly. That's one of those sentences that rang so true to me, because that's exactly as I have experienced the last 50 plus years, having walked away from my evangelical background. At 71, when you're 71, some things you write, you'll wish you had done differently, but this sentence will be true. Redefining healing as an ongoing process. Ongoing process it goes to show, showed me immediately that you're onto something good. And you talk about the fact, you say, this book is a culmination of my doctoral research, clinical experience, and personal story. While I won't be laying out a step-by-step process of how to heal trauma or guaranteeing specific outcomes, I want to inspire hope that living in a healing body is possible after experiencing religious trauma. And all I can say is the book delivers on that. I want to show you the coffee stain here. You deliver on that promise. Here it is. Can you see it?
Oh, I love it. I can. Yes. I love it.
And you can see it's quite dog-eared here. You can see I've turned down a lot of pages. So we're going to be reading some things. But the first thing I want to do is jump into the context of the book, which overlaps some of my experience and then is very different in another area. It overlaps my fundamentalist evangelical childhood. It overlaps worrying about Jesus coming back and will I be saved and all that trauma. Where my experience was different than yours, and I actually wrote a book called Sex, Mom, and God to explore this, was that my parents were very pro-sexuality in an evangelical sense of you wait until marriage, but actually rejoiced in sexuality being okay. And when I got Jeannie pregnant when we were 17 and 18, and we've now been together 53 years, and it worked out, one of the reasons it did is I had my parents' total support, and this was whether we married or not.
Wow.
In other words, they were so much better than their theology, and their kindness was so much better than what you experienced in terms of the brutality and the trauma and the abuse of the purity movement. In the last part of the book, you say that the purity movement in the early 2000s was abusive. So why don't we dive into that part of your life, and let's talk about the history of the purity movement, how it came about, what happened to you personally. I guess you were saying in the book that you wound up wearing one of the rings and they celebrated
Sure did,
and so forth. So let's get into, there's a lot of personal history there, but let's go there first, and first explain to people who are listening what the purity movement was about, what it came from, how you were damaged by it, and then your own journey towards accepting pleasure as a thing, as you do in the later chapters of your book.
Yeah, well, the purity movement, as we kind of talk about it today, really began in 1993. We do have a lot of research that suggests it began far before that, back into the 40s and 50s, post-World War II era. But for the purposes of this conversation today, we'll focus on kind of that 1993 point, which is the beginning of the True Love Waits campaign. This was, fueled by the Southern Baptist Convention. This is where we start to see Josh Harris, who's the author of I Kiss Dating Goodbye. And we see him propped up by a lot of powerful evangelical pastors and leaders at the time to really promote this idea of abstinence before marriage is God's way, the right way to be in relationship with one another. But of course, they didn't stop there. That was a public facing message. Abstinence before marriage is cool. We had celebrities that were also following suit, making proclamations of this. But then, of course, if you went deeper into that, it didn't stop there. It went into all sorts of things such as gender roles, modesty, comparing people to, chewed up pieces of gum, and really started grading away at people's identities, sense of worth, and increase the amount of shame exponentially. And so I was in middle school at the time that this was happening. And that's a very key age for people to be getting on board. It's why so many movements target adolescents, because our brains aren't formed at that point. And so we are passionate and ego driven and don't have a lot of ability to think critically. And so there's a lot of targeting of adolescents, so ages 15 to 25, of going, this is the right way to do things. This is how you must do things, in fact, in order to be in a godly relationship. I bought into that. I wanted the reward that was promised of a husband with out of this world sex. That was the reward if we followed these steps. And I did follow all the steps, and I didn't get it. And in that culture, when you don't have the thing that you want, well, it must be something wrong with you. It clearly there's unrepented sin. There is, things that you're maybe idolizing over God. There's all these things that can be excuses as to why you haven't gotten this thing, and needing to do a whole list of spiritual practices in order to, kind of move forward with that. But I took it hook, line, and sinker. I think about, for most people in their early 20s, it's a very unstable time where they don't necessarily feel like they have good footing to stand on, especially in, just the way that our bodies are created. And so purity culture for me felt like this oddly stable ground that it gave me a sense of like, I do these things and here's what I can expect. And so I was in it. My first kiss wasn't until I was 2 months shy of 30. I had made I was going to not kiss until my wedding day. But when I moved to Nashville is when I started to be able to kind of unpack things in a bit of a different way. And was able to realize, oh yeah, the Bible doesn't say don't kiss before you're married. And I had kind of a gentle nudging, and it eventually allowed me into exploration with myself and with other partners, to tap back into what I think is the essence of our humanity. That sexual piece is truly like innate. It is part of us. And I believe it is where passion comes from, and creativity and connection. And it's so much more than just who you have sex with. And I believe that in high control religion, when we can vilify that and cut that off, it is so much easier to have control over people, right? If I can say this huge part, this core essence piece of you, if that is evil, then if you believe that, then that means I get to be the one to tell you what is right and wrong, good and bad, things like that. And so that's really where I started to deconstruct what that looked like, and also understand what that looked like in my body. I share in the book that my first sexual experience, I expected to feel so much guilt and shame, and I didn't. I felt connected. I felt more myself than I ever had before. And the guilt and shame that I experienced was because I didn't feel guilt and shame. And I actually begged God to convict me for weeks. I thought, oh my gosh, my heart is hard. I have gone so far away from God, until a wonderful friend one night said, I trust your relationship with God. I trust that you've been, honest, and maybe you don't create guilt where there isn't any. So that's what I took that, and I ran with that, and it allowed me this open door then to start untangling all these other things. And then of course, leaning into the pleasure piece that did not come overnight. And that started far beyond the sexual pieces. I had to learn how to just find pleasure in the taste of a raspberry or the smell of fresh cut grass. That was really important before I could translate that into the sexual realm and actually start to feel pleasure in my body in non-sexual ways, as well as then sexual ways.
There's a section of the book, I forget whether it's toward the end or not, but there's a good little story where you talk about, I think, being 3 or maybe 5 years old, and
yes,
you put your head down on a boy who was next to you, and you hugged, and it felt so right and close and lovely, as children do. And then your father tapped you pretty hard on the shoulder and took you inside to tell you not to do that again. I know that's not what you were talking about a minute ago when you said your first sexual experience, but I think those stories tie together.
I do, because when I, years later after this sexual experience, I was able to say, that was not actually the first time that I felt that way. There was a time decades before where I felt that. And as a, small child, 4 or 5 years old, there was an intrinsic knowing inside of me. This is what life is.
Right.
It was touched.
And I hasten to add, in case people are misconstruing the story, it was, I mean, these words don't mean the thing. It was 2 little children hugging each other, basically, and one putting his head on her shoulder. So, in the sense, it wasn't sexual, but it was intimate, and it was kind.
Yes.
And it was a sense that my body is an instrument through which I can feel other people. I mean, I really liked that story. But it was a good little moment.
Thank you. Yeah, it's one of my favorite moments from my childhood, because I see, that was so pure, innocent. That was like that was me, you know. And
Yeah.
then we can see in like my story and in so many other people's stories where other people's shame is heaped on you, and rules and fundamentalism, and that little girl in my case gets covered up by
Sure.
all of these other things. And I think that's so true for so many people, where they
Yeah.
go, that experience is, it's not okay to show up as me. And so I
Mhm.
have to fragment that, box it in, and put all these other stipulations on top. And I love getting back to her. That feels important.
I don't know where this is, but I want to just, it was not on the purity culture. Let me see before I want to read a passage, so I'll start talking about it. Yeah. And this is one that I resonated with very deeply myself and have written about and talked about openly in very similar terms. You say, in a patriarchal system, no one wins, which of course you were brought up in. Though it would appear that a cisgender heterosexual white man, that might be me, has the upper hand, that's not me. This should not be mistaken as winning, in quotes. I work with many individuals who hold this identity and who have been deeply wounded by religious patriarchal standards, and who experience great pain and remorse for having inflicted and lived out those patriarchal standards in ways that have oppressed others. That really jumped off the page to me, because you were actually talking to me personally at that moment in terms of something that could have destroyed my whole life, as in, had I stuck with the program, I would have lost my relationship with Jeannie. Today, I would not be picking my granddaughter Nora up from school, because that whole life would have dissolved. Because, and as I have put this in writing in some place, I forget where, but I was basically groomed to be an asshole by divine right.
Yeah,
In other
that's a
words,
great,
it wasn't just that I was born an asshole. I was told that that's the way to be.
Right.
So that, you know, I was passionately and deeply in love with Jeannie as a young married couple. But the way I thought I was supposed to act actually was horrible, in that I was the boss. I was too harsh with the children. I was in charge. It took me a long time to get over that. And the thing is, I mean, it sounds like a whiny thing to say, I suffered too, knowing that I had been so difficult to her. But, you know, I was very lucky in that Jeannie had a generous spirit and was helpful to me in not only in talking to me about getting some therapy, which I did at one point, but also kind of understood. We were very lucky in that we lived in the Labrie Fellowship community, where I grew up for 10 years as a young married couple. So she sort of knew what I had come from. She knew my father, and she knew I was trying to move beyond that, and gave me a second and third and fourth and fifth chance. That said, you know, and again, this sounds very touchy-feely and self-pitying, but her suffering became mine, because I really loved her. And I was so ashamed of the fact that I had sworn to myself, I'll never be like my father, bossing my mom around, shouting, and so forth and so on.
Yeah.
And then I was exactly like him.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah.
Because it was like I had been.
Yeah.
And then talking about, you say, do this in small pieces. It takes a long time. It took so much longer than I thought it should have. So then, you know, and in the end, believe it or not, this has a happy ending, because we not only stayed together, and there was a lot of resolution and healing, but the profundity of a relationship where you have been forgiven, and someone has gone on and helped you, and at the same time is very, very strong, which Jeannie is, you know, is the greatest gift of my life. But but there's no less sorrow in looking back. And I have not gotten beyond that. I've not only guilt, but really sadness.
Yeah.
And, like what happened there? So, you know, I resonated so deeply with that, and would just say that for people who have been dispensers of the religious trauma, like I was to a whole generation of women who watched our movies against abortion, and not to mention the abortion doctors that got killed because they were following my dad and my stuff. Pro-life people were. You know, on a personal note, everything you're saying in this book is exactly what put everything I love most in this life at greatest risk. And if I had been able to talk to you in my 20s, it would have been a good thing. I'm sorry I missed you by 50 years. Too bad. But
Yeah.
Where were
Yeah. Well,
you?
you know what? Yeah. I was a figment of imagination, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's so hard because really truly nobody wins. And not that not life is not about winning and losing,
Yeah.
but in this system it does appear that there's a group of people that are the winners, and it just is not true.
Yeah.
Because I can't tell you the number of men I have sat with in my office or online spaces that are so grieved
Yeah.
at what they have done to others, at what they have done to themselves, and who daily try to be aware and insightful and making different choices,
Mhm.
and they do an excellent job. But it is lifelong, because we don't, I think it's so common to say like, oh, just leave that all behind. I just don't think that way. I've left religion. Maybe I'm an atheist or whatever. But when you are in it, like, it is in your body, it is ingrained into your neural pathways, and your entire body is impacted. It's not just leaving it behind. It's recognizing how it was embodied in you, and taking the painful, uncomfortable steps every day of the little tiny choices that we make that are different. And it then becomes habit. I'm sure, in the last couple decades, there's things where you're like, oh, I don't even think about that anymore. It's just, now this is who I am. It's a different version of me. But it can be really painful and long suffering until that point, until it becomes a new part of our subconscious, essentially.
Yeah, but the thing is, there's such a deep wounding there by people who are brought up.
Yeah.
And I want to cut to the chase on something here. And again, tell my listeners to forgive me. I'm forgetting that this is supposed to be a podcast where you learn about the book, and I'm talking about myself here. But you're listening to In Conversation with Frank Schaeffer. This is Dr. Laura Anderson, and her book is When Religion Hurts You, and it's a really good book. And you can see it's sort of gotten to me because I'm forgetting to do this interview properly, which is a compliment to the book. I'm just talking to you about it.
I will
But
take that as a compliment.
you can
Yes.
send me the bill. I suppose, you haven't billed me for the time. But yeah, I want to cut to a part of the book. And again, forgive me for thumbing around in this, but I want to get to the section where you sort of list some things where kind of general categories of what can be done about this. And why don't I prepare better? I could have stuck I'm just one post-it away from looking like I have my act together. Isn't it sad? Oh yeah, here it is. It's like folding the pages down. There's only so much to that. Okay, religious abuse. I should have done this at the beginning. Let's describe what it is. Religious abuse is abuse administered under the guise of religion, period. And then you say more, but then you have some subheadings. Coercion and threats, convincing individuals that they must follow certain rules and lifestyles to secure eternity. Intimidation, making people feel afraid by using actions and gestures that could suggest disconnection from the community. Emotional abuse, making individuals feel bad about themselves, calling them names, etc. By the way, all of which you kind of experienced or you talk about in the earlier part of the book. Isolation, requiring individuals to have relationships only with people inside the religious system, like that youth pastor who was telling you that he was your religious authority and you had to do what he said, and the threat of being kicked out. Minimizing, denying, and blaming, making light of the requirement to be part of the system. Patriarchal privilege, what we just talked about, treating women and children and other marginalized individuals as lesser or subservient, mea culpa, lifetime of work required. Economic abuse, preventing people from pursuing education, discouraging people from obtaining non-ministry job training, etc. So I want you to talk, first of all, how those various categories were part of your life, because you experienced all those things in some form. So make it personal. And then talk a little bit about the paths out of those things, because that'll be very useful, which is sort of asking you to jump into later parts of your book. And I'm not going to thumb around and waste time finding, what's in there.
Yeah. Well, so I'll start with this. When I first started as a therapist, one of my first clientels were working with women, mostly women, coming out of domestically violent relationships, or maybe they were still in it and trying to get out of it. Unbeknownst to me, I was in one also. Like it was like, you're kind of working with the person and you're like, this feels really familiar, but I can't quite name it because that would mean I have to change things. And I finally started to realize this person that I'm in a relationship with is extremely abusive. And we were together. I kicked him out of our home, got him out of my life. And one night I was thumbing through my journals and I was like kind of dumbfounded because I couldn't not differentiate between what he had told me and what I had learned from church leaders. I would see these statements and I'm like, I don't know who said that. And that really struck me because I all of a sudden realized, when people ask domestic violence victims, how did you get into this or why did you stay? Okay, that's a wrong question for a myriad of other reasons that is beyond this conversation. But I saw in that moment why, because like when he would tell me, you're stupid, you're not worthy, you need me in order to live. That was not weird for me to hear. No. I had grown up decades at that point, believing that about myself from this higher power that I served.
Well, one of the points you make, and I just want to throw it as a footnote, sorry to interrupt you, but it was a really powerful point. That people who grow up used to corporal punishment are then they are conditioned to be punished, even if it's not physical. Like, hey, this is the world we live in. Okay, sorry.
Yeah. When you hear that statement, I'm punishing you because I love you.
Yeah, right.
A child does not know how to differentiate between quote unquote loving assault and unsafe physical assault. No, it's just assault. It's just abuse, right? And so I was able to start to see like, wow, these experiences are exactly the same. So for me, healing from that abusive relationship and abusive religion actually went hand in hand. I could not separate the two because of just where I was at in life.
How long were you in that relationship?
It took a long time.
How long were you in the relationship?
We were together about 2 years.
Okay. And then, and where in the, sorry to peg you down on this, but where in the process of your, as it were, escaping the religious background, as well as the relationship, how did that all shake out? What came first? Were you on your way out? Can you just talk about that a little bit?
Yes. I was, and the timing of it is very unsurprising. I, grew up in the North. I had moved down here to Nashville, and it was the first time that I kind of had freedom outside of this community that I had grown up in. I had already kind of started to deconstruct my faith, but hadn't been able to make active moves. I'd just mostly been thinking about things differently. I didn't really do anything different. When I came down here, I began attending what they called a progressive Southern Baptist church, which is where I met this person. And in some ways, that experience was really helpful because that church did allow for questions to be asked. That was really important for me. In the past, I had asked questions, and that was met with a lot of accusations of doubt and unbelief and questioning my salvation. So to be able to ask questions was really wonderful. And that was actually something that appealed to me about this particular person, was because he engaged in those conversations with me. He wasn't scared off. He didn't think I wasn't a godly, submissive woman because I simply asked questions. And I think he used what he knew of my religious background also to kind of what we call like love bomb and, kind of wiggle his way into my good favor. I really thought that he was the exception, not the norm in terms of like people that ask questions. It was such a brand new territory for me. Probably about a year and a half into our relationship is when I was like, I don't think I can do the church thing anymore. And he was fine with it as well. We kind of stopped attending church together. I had intentions to go back. I just never did. I'm not sure, it was about 6 months later that we were done. So I'm not sure. I'm assuming he did because his sister was married to the pastor. So, I'm assuming that he's probably still back at that church, however, so that was 13-ish years ago. And so I had been kind of cognitively deconstructing for several years at that point, but that was really the first time that I started kind of making different actions in my life, whether that was the things that I did, the relationships I was in, including friendships, working relationships, things that I wore, where I started, to not have to wear frumpy men's clothes to hide my body. I, wore things that I wanted to.
Mm.
So it was very pivotal and in some ways cliche, right? You kind of leave the nest and you go crazy, but whatever. I guess I'm a statistic at this point. But yeah, it was a very much in tandem process. And in some ways, I'm glad because I think it would have been difficult to go through kind of sequentially, like one after the other. But it was not easy. And I dealt with a lot of physiological and psychological symptoms as a result. When I was finally out of those situations that were unsafe, we kind of think like, oh, I'm safe now, so I should be good to go. But oftentimes that's when our body's like, okay, now that we're safe, here's all these things that have been happening that we've just been suppressing. And that really was the case for me. And so I did deal with a lot, and I detail it in parts in the book of, I spent a lot of isolated time because I was so scared to be in public. And there was so many symptoms manifesting that had this giant question mark over them where I couldn't get answers from doctors. And I would try this or that and it wouldn't work. And, the spoiler alert is that it was trauma. It was just that it was so unaddressed and nobody
Sure.
was seeing it as that. I was being honest about what had happened and what my story was. And the closest a doctor came to it one time was, he goes, well, given everything that you've been through, it wouldn't surprise me if you were depressed. In fact, it would surprise me if you weren't depressed. And he was not wrong. He just wasn't thorough. It wasn't just that. And so I went for many, many years and tens of thousands of dollars spending money trying to work through depression and anxiety and insomnia and extreme weight gain and gastrointestinal issues and dissociation and inability to have relationships or hold boundaries and wondering if I had autoimmune disorders. And it wasn't until I finally started working with this therapist that kind of flippantly one day was like, well, when you have complex post-traumatic stress disorder, blah, blah, blah. And I said, hold on, what did you just say? And she goes, CPTSD. And I was like, wait, I have that? And she goes, you didn't know you have that? And we had a great relationship. It was okay for her to say that. And it was like all these puzzle pieces just came together in my mind in that instant because I knew all the defining factors of CPTSD. I knew what the research was. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's exactly what it is. But that was what allowed me then to kind of tap into other modalities of healing, actually removed a lot of shame. I shamed myself so much. Why can't you just get over this? Why can't you just, get your shit figured out or whatever it was? And having that simple diagnosis was like, oh, it's because of this, because this is still alive and active in my body. My body has not realized that we're actually not in that situation anymore. It was
and
huge.
I like the way you talk about the fact that the body itself retains I know you don't use the term muscle memory, but that's the same kind of idea of the trauma.
Yes. Yeah.
And it reminds me of some of the studies that I've read about experiments that have been done to show that even hurt within our ancestry can be translated down into next generations in terms of almost a genetic memory of injury. Experiments on mice, this sort of thing, have been done to show that. So, the physical outcome, the physical result of what has been called psychological trauma is real. It's not like this is made up. This actually happens. And I understand that experience. And I like the way you track the body, as it were, as part of what you're ministering to rather than just the mind. Just the mind. Condescending. But,
our brains are important, but when we look at where is the trauma held, it's in our bodies, which means we don't just think it away. We do cognitively know, yes, I'm not back in that situation anymore, but that's not the way that our nervous system kind of tracks that overwhelm and that sense of threat or pervasive threat. It tracks it in the body. So yes, having kind of a multifaceted approach then to healing, I think is extremely important and it is more holistic.
One thing I'll just mention, if you want to get in touch with Laura and talk to her about any of your own problems or read her book or whatever, we don't have to keep saying how to buy it. We're going to post wherever this podcast happens, wherever you see it, you're going to have a link to When Religion Hurts You, so you can buy the book. But also, we'll post anything, Laura, that you want. You can tell Ernie, our producer, anything that you want in terms of contact, so people don't have to go searching for you. I want to dive back into the book itself here, to this purity culture again that you talked about before, because I think that's important. And I'll give it a weird context. It's all, we're talking about your Christian background and mine, but I want to expand the frame here and say that, one of the things that I talk about a lot in my commentaries, I do a commentaries video and other things on our Substack and et cetera, et cetera. But one of the themes that I'm addressing is that I think too often we see a lot of our problems in the US as isolated from the rest of the planet and history. There's nothing you're saying in this book that wouldn't be experienced by an Islamic young woman living in Gaza under the tutelage of Hamas. There's nothing in your writing that isn't also true of a young Jewish woman being raised on the West Bank by Israeli settlers who are pitching her a similar thing. My Roman Catholic raised wife, was told to touch herself down there by the nuns who raised her, use a face cloth. You never want to touch yourself, in terms of your genitalia. I could go on. The results, if you look around the planet today and you see women being raped in police stations in Iran for not wearing a head covering, religious trauma is not an evangelical problem. It is a religious problem. That long preamble brings me to another question that you don't cover in your book, and I'm going to put it to you.
Okay.
That is that in terms of my own journey, I find all religion suspect. And I don't mean that as a reaction to my background. I mean that in world historical terms. We need more religion and spirituality translated as religion, like we need a hole in the head. What's happening in Gaza, Israel, is at the door of religion. If you look at the Arab armies invading the entire North African continent in the 7th century, this was religious-driven genocide. If you look at what we did with the Native Americans, this was religious-driven genocide. I am sick of talking to Christians, and I don't want to put you on the spot, who tell me, well, they're not actually following Jesus. As if somehow there's this perfection of Christianity somewhere that if they'd only get their act together. The problem with Jesus is that he also was an exclusionary person who said, I am the way, the truth, and the life, and no one comes to the Father but me. Set of rules. I am no longer a Christian. I am on the path to atheism. At best, on my best, I am agnostic. I still pray because I was raised by my mother to do that. Have you got a problem with that? That's talking psychology. But in terms of belief, it is bullshit. And in terms of the world historical situation, Vladimir Putin is attacking Ukraine with the backing of the Orthodox Church in Russia. He's claiming to represent true orthodoxy. Religious trauma is global. There were two Christian women stripped naked, chased by a Hindu mob in India, raped, and it took 42 days for anybody to even investigate it because of Hindu nationalism. So what you're talking about in your book is a sliver of a global problem that is destroying our planet, including all the Abrahamic religions, Hinduism as well, maybe a little less, but certainly the Abrahamic religions' view of the environment. And so I have a question for you as a fellow traveler and sufferer. I'm asking you, Laura Anderson, PhD. Where are you at in terms of looking at what religion is doing to us and just saying, hey, enough. Not just for personal trauma, global trauma. And now I'll shut the F up.
So I tell people I am not anti-religion. I'm anti-harm. I'm anti-oppression. I'm racism. I am anti-abuse, all these things, because I don't want to be in charge of anybody's beliefs. I don't want to say, here's what you must or must not believe. That feels just as fundamentalist to me as what I grew up in. For myself personally, what I will say is if you can find something that fits those parameters, great. I haven't been able to find it yet. I have not been able to find a religion or spiritual practice that isn't built on dynamics of power and control, or patriarchy, or oppression, or abuse, or wanting to have, deep control over other people, or isn't based on fear. I've not been able to find that. Maybe somebody has. I don't know. I don't know all the people in this world, and I don't know their practices. But for me personally, I have not been able to find that. And so that's a personal thing. As a therapist, I am trained to allow the people I work with to believe whatever they want. And I think you could poll my clients and they would say, yeah, she's never tried to impose or convince or coerce. That's a value of mine that I have, and I would never do that personally or professionally. But I do agree with you that when we start to look at what is going on in the world, just in a very general sense, we cannot discount the role, the huge role, the foundational role that religion and religious supremacy, whatever the religion is that they're trying to be supreme, what that has in terms of how they view people who are different than them, and therefore the control that they are allowed to have over them, or they think they're allowed to have over them. When we believe, white Christian nationalism, Christian supremacy, if I believe that I am supreme and the God that I believe in is supreme and all these things, there is an automatic permission that I'm given and I give to other people to do and say and act and treat people in some really awful, abusive, oppressive ways. But I get away with it because I say, God, it's God's will, right? I don't buy that anymore. I don't believe love and abuse can go together. It's a mind fuck, quite honestly.
Yeah.
I was taught that for far too many years, and I'm not interested in promoting those messages anymore, personally and or professionally as well. I mean, I don't do that professionally either. I let people can decide for themselves. That is not my job to figure that out for them. And yet, I do love to encourage people to be curious about that, because I think when you do lean into it, you find a lot that can sometimes be really horrifying. It's not fun. Like what you just said there, it's not pleasant to actually think about the realities of this and to understand why wars are currently happening and why they have in the past, why genocide has happened, why different groups of people have been attacked or wiped out entirely. And I'm not, a historian, so I can't tell you it's this percentage of wars or genocides or whatever, but I would say probably a large chunk of them have to do with some sort of spiritual or religious belief of supremacy, that my God or my higher power gave me permission to have power over you and do whatever I needed to in order to maintain that. That's my personal belief.
Yeah. You and me are on the same track. And of course, I understand completely in talking to you as a physician, as it were, because you're a therapist, that your personal, the job of oncology is not to change somebody's religion. It's just to help them get over cancer. And you have a narrow, I don't mean narrow focus. I don't mean that as a pejorative. No. You have a certain job to do.
I know.
But just between you and me, with no one listening, because this isn't a podcast.
Exactly.
With nice Christian people, including my very progressive friends, who tell me that, but the real Jesus, if you just follow Jesus and so forth. I'm so sorry, but Edward III, when he massacred French village after French village, was following the real Jesus, thought he was being chivalrous, claimed the crown of France. There aren't any exceptions to this. And all these people who are telling me that there's a sort of another version of Christianity, and if only you would do that, it would be okay. Have obviously blinded themselves to the actual history. And I want to tell you something, and this will really put me out on a limb. People talk about Islamophobia or anti-Semitism and so forth. Okay, fine. But it only applies if you're singling out one religion. But I have a new term for you, and that is, I will tell you straight that at this point in my life, at 71 years old, having journeyed what I've done and thought about it and observed, if you're not religious phobic, you're crazy.
Because interesting.
Forget individual religions, and that's all of them. So, Islamophobic, all of it. Religious phobic is the term. You're not singling out, but the human phenomenon that you talk about in your book of dealing with mortality by looking through these answers and then turning that into a system of belief predicated on no evidence whatsoever, all of them are crazy. There is nothing real in any of them. And I want to throw something else at you and see what you think about this. And just remember, this isn't a podcast. No one will quote you. You can relax. Hey, Laura, you're safe.
Love it.
You're safe.
Oh, good. Safe space. Yeah.
This is all in confidence. I'm offering you a safe space. It seems to me that there are parts of religion that work very well. You know why? From my point of view, say Jesus saying be nice to somebody because you want them to treat you the same way. It's because evolution herself taught us how to survive. It never was about the survival of the fittest. It was always about the survival of the friendliest. It was always about cooperation and community. So if a church fosters community, of course it's going to work, not because it's a church or Jesus, but because community is the only reason you and me have survived and our ancestors survived, so we can talk to each other. So where religion resonates with what we all long for because we are evolved creatures on an evolutionary path where survival depends on cooperation and community, obviously connection bolsters that is going to mean a lot to us. But religion did not invent this. Because pre-religion, hunter-gatherers learned how to live together and get on, or we'd all be dead. And so I think it's a total cart and horse thing to my dad's apologetics, which were, this proves Christianity is true because it works. No, it works. And where Christianity reflects that, such as love your neighbor, then of course it resonates. And then when it goes the next steps and says, I am the truth, the life, and the way, and no man comes to the Father but by me, this is BS and not true. And in addition to which is going to set up the parameters for Martin Luther to come along and say, those Jews don't agree with this, we will kill them. And that's where everything comes off. So there is no religion that doesn't have exclusionary statements. Islam, Christianity, Hinduism, Hindu nationalism, the whole thing is the same thing. And I am religious. People will say, are you an atheist now? No, I'll tell you what I am. I'm religious phobic.
Yeah, that is such an interesting term. And I really agree with what you said. I've said this in multiple podcasts before where like religion, just like capital R, doesn't matter, whatever religion it is. They have an understanding, whether it's intentional or not, of how the human nervous system works in terms of needs for survival. And connection is one of them. And they go, hey, this is like this connection, this community that we provide is a basic human need.
Right.
It just is, right? And so we can provide that, but we provide it with all these other parameters. The other thing that they play on is humans' need or desire for certainty. So when I put rules around things, I can play off of what another human need is to be certain, to have a sense of stability within this system and community, which then creates fundamentalism. Here's what you do, here's what you don't do. And I think that religion, whatever the religion is, understands human psychology and physiology in a very basic way that then can create a system of control and then oppression, well, inside of it and outside of it, or exclusionary, like you're talking about. Yeah. It's not. Yeah. I know. There's so many more. And that's the thing is like, you know, with the book, it's like, I had to pick a lane and go, and I picked the lane that I had expertise in, with my research. But to your point of, you know, this book applies to, yes, us here in the United States. And of course the examples are based off of my own in a specific religion. However, the principles, the underlying pieces of it, the human physiology of it, that doesn't belong to evangelical Christians or the United States. It can be transferable to anybody. And in fact, one of the publishers that initially made an offer on the book pulled it because I wouldn't say this is only an evangelical Christian problem. And I said, I'm sorry, I can't do that. I can write from my experience, but I can't say that this is only this problem. And they said, well, we're sorry, then we're going to pull the book or pull our offer for the book. And I said, well, okay, that's like, you're not my person anyways then. But I agree. I'm like,
cultural appropriation basis that, you know, you can't talk about other religions. You've got to stick with white evangelical. Yeah. Where you came from. I mean, what was that about?
I think that was in part, I think they wanted to be like, well, you're not Muslim, so you can't speak to that. I said, no, I'm actually not speaking to that. I am simply saying, here's what the body does. And this does not matter if you are evangelical fundamentalist Christian, or you are Muslim, or you are Hindu, or you are whatever. And they were like, nope, we don't want that. We want you to only say this is applying to, Christianity in the United States. And I was like, well, that feels like a bit unethical. So
Yeah, and also
not going to go that route.
But it's exactly what I was talking about a few minutes ago at the beginning of my little rant, saying I am tired of people who come from either a progressive position or, call it a kind of a misconceived woke position on an evangelical progressive map where, we can criticize our Western Christian thing because that's us, but God forbid anybody, we extend this. And like I say, I'm sorry, I'm going there. I am religious phobic. Yep, that's all of you. And I think, you were walking in the dark and you were persecuting people. And a young woman growing up in Gaza under Hamas's tutelage is in the same shape as I said a minute ago, a young woman growing up in the West Bank on stolen land with Jewish parents who are as much fist in the face, sure, they're right, as your parents were with you and mine with me. It is all one piece of cloth, and it's the human dilemma. It's nothing to do with any specific religion. To me, I think we have to look at what has evolution taught us, and what does science teach us about what evolution has taught us. And if you want to have a religion, start studying that. And I think your book fits in with that.
Yes,
I don't think we should let any of the religious people off the hook on this stuff. They're wrecking our world. We live here. We have every right to speak to it.
I agree.
Good.
Snaps
She
for that. Yes.
We'll
Doctor
the parts where I'm talking and just leave you saying I agree.
Good. Yes. Do that.
And then we can mirror our evangelical past, saying, look, if you send $25, we'll tell you what he said.
Yeah, exactly. And we'll bless you too. Yeah.
You can contribute to our defense fund.
Oh, yes. What is it? John Oliver? Do you watch John Oliver ever? He created a fake church where he, invited people to send money, of course, tax free. And so we can do that. We can create our church of perpetual, whatever. Perpetual. I can't remember what he called it. It was pretty funny though. Perpetual something.
Let me get back to the book here. When religion hurts you. This is an important book. And Laura's a lovely person, as you've just seen, if you've watched or listened to even minutes of this. I'm hoping people run out and buy the book. It came out, I think, October 17. So it's pretty new.
That's correct. Yep.
And it was published by a division of Baker Books, which puts you sort of still in a religious something or other, kind of.
Yes. Yeah. This was a bit shocking for me. It was not what I thought I was going to do. And they did not make me change a single thing, which was really shocking. There was a couple things that I really pushed back on. One of them was having my story in it. They were like, do you really need to? And I said, yes, I really do need to.
And why didn't they want your story in it? Because like it would be less academic that way, or less serious or something?
Yeah, I think they were like, well, your story is featured in other pieces, little anecdotes here or there. And I was like, no, I think people need to know that, yes, I know the research, but what I know is the lived experience. I know that piece. And I said, I will condense it into one chapter. I will, but people need to know that. And they said, okay. There was a couple other teeny tiny things that they were like, do you really need to have this? And I was like, yes, I do. That was end of the discussion. And I've consistently gotten feedback. They're like, oh, this little sentence here, that means a lot. I was like, yes, I knew that needed to be in there.
Well, you can tell him Frank Schaeffer interviewed me and went exactly the other way and came back and said, hey, I love the forward. Where's the afterward? He wanted more.
Right. I will.
All this stuff in the middle that does you good. Forget that. Where's her story?
I love it. It's so good. I will put that in my notes because
you just say,
they want me to write another book. So,
that's it. He just said, hey, come on, when this goes to mass paperback and then you write that little afterward and saying, since the book came out, here's what's happened in life. So
I love it.
let me
Good.
wrap this up by saying, A, I've enjoyed it very much, but B, I'm sure
Mm,
there's lots I haven't covered. I want people to buy the book and read it. Um,
mm.
what would you like to say that I have not drawn out of you by intelligent questions instead of just having fun talking to you?
Hmm. Well, it sounds really cliche, but the whole reason I wrote the book is because I want people to know that healing is possible.
Mm.
Yes, there is a lifelong piece to it, but it does not mean that you have to be in the deep, dark trenches in therapy and, doing all these things. Healing, like the goal of healing is living. And
Mm.
I think, especially coming out of religion, we don't often know that because religion is so intent on getting to heaven or getting to the afterlife that we forget to live life here on earth. And so I just want to offer that to people, that I think the goal of doing all of this work is to actually live, to be present, to enjoy our relationships, to experience pleasure. And this is the one life we have, like, why not enjoy it? And we don't have to be defined by these things that happen to us.
Right.
They did happen to us, and then we can move past that and through that, and those can be a memory that help to shape us but do not become our entire identity.
Mm.
And that to me feels more hopeful than where we used to be at.
Mhm.
So I always love to say, or to encourage people towards that it's about living. And I hope that my book can provide a bit of encouragement or hope towards that.
Yeah. So, Laura, I'll wrap up by saying, as you continue your journey, please come back and talk to us again, even if you don't have a book
Yes.
to sell. If you
Yeah, I would love
think,
to.
get in touch with her and say, I want to be interviewed again, and then we will. And
Okay.
then if you come
Yeah.
across someone else who is doing some interesting thinking on this, another author or another therapist or just
Hmm.
someone you know, they don't have to be professional or anything,
Yes.
please send her their name and say, hey, you'd enjoy interviewing so-and-so for such and such a reason, because we're always looking for a good
Okay.
guest. And lastly, to
Oh,
everybody
I love it.
listening, please subscribe to Frank Schaeffer at Substack, because that's where we get recognized and do things. Please like this and share it with people, because we want other people to meet Laura and read her book. So please find ways of sharing this, and
Thank
support us
you.
by subscribing to Substack, where I do my stuff, and you'll hear this as well. So,
I
Laura,
love
thank you
it.
very
Thank
much.
you.
This was
Thank
good.
you. This has been so delightful. I've loved every moment.
Yeah, me too. So thanks a lot.
Yes.
And we'll
Mhm.
talk again, I hope. And if there's anything Ernie or I can do for you, let us know, because we're fans.
Oh, thank you. You are a huge, you were one of the first people I found when I was doing some of this weird faith deconstruction stuff. And I
Mm.
was like, wait, I know that name. Well,
Mm.
it turns out I knew your dad's name, and then kind of followed your journey. And so you've been so influential. I've read multiple books of yours. I've really appreciated the work that you've done and the encouragement that you've had for me personally. When I heard back that you were like, "Do you want to come on my podcast?" I was like, "Oh shit, this is like a redemptive moment for me, because you've been so impactful." So it just, like, my heart is smiling so big to hear that you liked what I wrote.
I
That means
love
so
that.
much.
Well, and
Yeah,
you wrote the
yeah.
truth. As I said, I can't compliment
Thank
you
you.
above that. You wrote the truth. And at
Yeah,
points where your book
it's
touches
huge.
my life, as in describes things I've
Yes.
been through, it's like,
Yeah.
she nailed this. She nailed it.
Mm,
So well done,
yeah.
Laura.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks for reading my stuff, but I'm your fan. So thank you.
Yeah. Oh,
Okay, bye.
oh, thank you. So wonderful. Bye.